So also inside the feature food district here at the Expo, you know, in addition to thinking about technology, and anywhere we go, we can see there's a load of technology available for the guests to interact with. We could think about going back to this tradition of cultural displays. You could also think then about the folkways, and of course food is a very important folkway, and one of the things that the Expo tradition really introduced to us was this idea of associating certain foods, lifestyles with cultures. And so you see this in full force with all the cultures being represented here at Feature Food at the World Expo. Yeah, so as I'm walking here in the Cameroon area of the World Expo, which is part of the Cacao Cluster, it reminds me a little bit of cultural anthropology, and specifically the idea of the HRAF, the Human Resources Area Files. And this is an attempt back in the day to categorize cultures according to their key parts. So you would have these cards basically laid out, and you would have a list of all the rituals, all the dances, you might have kinship forms and so forth. And so I think it's quite natural when you come to a World Expo and you think about the essence of culture, even if you didn't have a food expo like this one, you would present things in terms of what you thought were the core foundations of that culture. So we can go inside Cameroon here and take a look at that. I should say that you know, the cluster areas actually are smaller, so what you get presented is much more less detailed than, say, if you're going to one of the major pavilions, China, as we saw, if you got a chance to watch some of my other videos. But you know, what's key, I think, is, you know, you're showing the foodways, you're showing the rituals, you're showing the key iconographic styles, the architectural styles, the folk life styles, design, of course, aesthetics as well. Not too much at the Expo gets into, in any of the pavilions really, the depth of culture that you might if you were doing an ethnological study, an ethnographic study. Of course, you know, you realize this because it's a much different presentation of cultures than what you would get in an ethnographic sense. But it is interesting to think about certainly how those essences get conveyed in the various pavilions, as we've seen here at World Expo 2015. Okay, so as you come out of Cambodia, again, you do see the presentation. In this case, we add to it key iconic places. So Angkor Wat, of course, is on the map for the essence of Cambodian culture. I think it's quite interesting, though. It presents a challenge for designers to think about, you know, how much is too much? Can you present, you know, the essence of a culture? Does it stereotype in a sense? Does it give people foundations that get repeated over and over again, such that they don't see the diversity of cultures? Unfortunately, did not get the chance this time around to see the Italian pavilion, but I know one of the things that was emphasized with the mini pavilions and food offerings here was the idea of the diversity of Italian ethnic identities and presenting those to guests. So it does offer possibilities, certainly, if you have the resources and space to do something on a grander scale, presenting more of the diversity of cultures than just those essences and foundations. And here is a look inside Bangladesh. Very first impression there was the spices. A lot of even the smaller pavilions, fortunately, have eateries, and as a result of that, you get a chance to just walk in and just take in all the senses, or at least the olfactory sense, and smell everything that the culture is about. So I think that's one exciting thing about the Expo. Didn't get a chance to see Burundi, unfortunately, but I was hoping to do so because they were advertising it as the five senses of Burundi. And here's Sierra Leone. Okay, so what was cool with Sierra Leone, as you went in, you could hear that, the music, right? So what's interesting is you can use a number of sensory devices, whether it's smell or touch or sound, in this case music, sight of course, to attract the guests, or to also give the guests the sense of what the culture involves. So one of the things that is notable in an expo, another characteristic, is the focus on cultural displays, the focus on trying to express the essence of various cultures. And this goes back to the World Expo tradition, certainly the 1893 at the Colombian Expo. Back then, of course, it was a much more stereotypical approach to cultures, whereas today it's a celebration of cultures. It's still a focus on essence, but you can see here some of the traditional crafts here in the Hungarian Pavilion. So in reference to my last point about how the World Expo tradition used to present cultures as essence in a much different sense, I'm showing you some images from my collection of the World's Columbian Exposition 1893, which took place in Chicago. I think as you'll see here, as we move through the various buildings here, these pavilions, and we get through to the end, in which we get these images, disturbing images of almost human zoos, you can agree perhaps that we've come a long way in terms of the focus on culture. Again, I think the tradition at this time, well over 100 years ago, was that people were less familiar, less able to contact other cultures, and their contact, thus being limited, led to situations of exoticism. And anthropologists themselves, ironically, were complicit in many of these displays. Again, it was a much different era, a much different time in terms of the presentation of place, of culture, and its various people. So I think it's important to look at these historic images and to have that realization as we place ourselves in the present moment. We do a bit of time travel, think about the past, compare it to the present day, and realize that indeed there are some things that have changed over time in terms of the Expo tradition. Again, as you see an image like this one here from 1893, you realize the problematic nature of this idea of the essence of culture as it's realized as a form of the exotic other, in the case here of culture. Now, jumping to the present, I think we can also see here in the images of Expo 2015 in Milan that in some cases, there were very iconic presentations of culture, maybe in ways that didn't surprise us as much. Again, a lot of pavilions use geography or specific place associations to make that connection. Some did, as you see here from the Pavilion of Egypt, use historic images and connected these to present day or more contemporary images, often through visual technology. But I fear that in some cases perhaps the associations that were made with the guest in terms of culture, in terms of its people, in terms of the folkways I've been talking about, perhaps were all too literal. And here, as we gaze upon the Pavilion of Oman, again I would make the point that often it was iconic architecture that was used to create that vivid association for the guest between a particular culture or nation and the associations that people expect of that culture or nations, accomplished through architecture in many cases. Now again, the clusters I think often presented some of the most exotic images of people, and we can certainly debate those. Now at the same time, there were some pleasant surprises in terms of less representational, less literal presentations of culture at the Expo. And in one such particular case, we see the Pavilion of Estonia. And Estonia used this interesting artistic approach of a gallery to present a slew of different types of information about the culture. In this case, you see here a focus on Skype, and I think many people wouldn't associate Skype with Estonia. So thus, I feel like they can challenge the representations, the essences that maybe we have in our mind, or some of the stereotypes that we might also have. And then another example here is from Slovakia. This very interesting work of art, and a lot of pavilions use artwork to convey a different sense of their cultures. And then likewise is the pavilion here of Slovenia, which really impressed me in terms of presenting things in different ways, using poetics, using verse on the wall, using more abstract associations. In this case, they're talking about the tradition of mountaineering, but doing so in a very unique, abstract, less representational or less literal way. So a lot to think about, I think, in terms of how to present the essence of culture, whether at an expo or any space of a themed nature from around the world. So I hope you enjoyed this video feature today here, focusing on the essences of culture at the Expo in Milan, and also at the historic Expo traditions as well. And please come back for additional video features of the Immersive Worlds Handbook.